Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming, where two guys who are qualified to talk about anything decide to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And on this episode, we are continuing forward on our little mini-series that I stumbled into, where we are going to talk about some games that we have played and enjoyed that are outside of the sort of games workshop sphere, that aren't Age of Sigmar, that aren't 40K, just to, one, shine a little spotlight on some games that are cool and probably deserve more love and attention than they get, but secondarily also to give people more options if you're a little upset about things that have been happening recently.
Yep. And if you're normally one of our Conquest listeners, don't worry, we're going to continue covering Conquest. We're just sort of like taking a little dip into other stuff right now while we also continue working on Conquest stuff in the background. So, fear not, we are not quitting Conquest either. We are going to keep playing that's for sure. It's in the rotation, as it were.
Yeah, the next thing, like, no cloak and daggers. The next thing we want to do is do focuses for all of the new starter boxes, which we've had to figure out whole new presentation sort of setups for, which we've actually now sort of got figured out, which is great with the editors. It's just trying to work through the prototyping phase of that and then actually start getting a few of them out to see if they're crappy or not. But it's coming. It's coming. In the meantime, we thought we would take a little time to jump from mid to high fantasy and instead leap entirely into space. Straight out into the galaxy.
Space.
Far, far away.
Space fantasy, but space.
Space. And, a galaxy far, far away. A long time ago and all that. To jump into a game that I've been playing for a while now, and that is Star Wars Legion. Which I just... What do I have to say? It's friggin' Star Wars. Like, it...
Yeah. Joe has been trying to convince me to get into Star Wars Legion for years, and I almost did a while back, and then just like a bunch of stuff happened, and I ended up not doing it. And now I've cycled back around to doing so. We've played our first game, and it was a pretty good time. And I'm still looking at getting more stuff. There's lots to love here for Star Wars Legion. I also watched a ton of Star Wars stuff I've missed on over the last couple of years. So
good for you, because there's some good stuff out there. Particularly some of them shows. Dave Filoni, our Lord. Me Lord. Dave Filoni.
Which like, that sort of brings us to the beginning, right? Like, this is Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
It is like the best setting for a war game because it is literally wars in the stars.
Yeah, normally we set these up with like a lore description. It's freaking Star Wars.
Like, there's a billion other better people who talk about Star Wars lore out there than us two chuckle fucks.
If you want to know anything about Star Wars, go watch any Star Wars that's better than I can present it. I recommend the Clone Wars TV show. Real cool. Go watch some Rebels, maybe some Bad Batch. Maybe the Karen Traviss novels if you really want to have like Tom Clancy in your Star Wars. Any of the movies, pretty great. Rogue One, incredible. Just anywhere else but here. But fine. You want us to summarize Star Wars? Fine. I've summarized your Star Wars. In a galaxy far, far away, you play one of 5 factions vying for dominance across the galaxy. The Republic, the Separatists, the Empire, the Rebels, and the Shadow Collective. And using recognizable characters from the movies, shows, books, and games, you build your own army and go toe-to-toe with your foes on a wargaming battlefield. There you go. Star Wars.
Yeah, and like a good portion to note here is I'm assuming most of you know what Star Wars is. This game sort of takes the concept of continuity and throws it out the window, right? Like, you can play Empire versus clones. I know it kind of makes sense now. With the
I was going to say, don't make me unactually you, John. Don't.
You can play Rebels versus Separatists, which again kind of makes sense, but like whatever. Like. But you can do whatever. Like, you can have Han Solo fighting Obi-Wan from the Clone Wars. Like, it's okay. You can have Anakin Skywalker fighting Darth Vader. It's okay. Like, it sort of throws all that out the window because at the end of the day, we're playing with action figures. And that's really sort of like the penultimate version of this, is that this is like the wargaming version of taking all of your Star Wars action figures and slapping them together. And like, or if you ever played that old action figures game where you had to like wind back the lightsabers to fight stuff or like shoot blasters. I don't remember what it's called. There's a thing when I was a kid. This is just like the war game version of that. It's really cool for that, like if that's what you want. But if you don't like Star Wars, here's your warning: don't play this. Like, don't play this for not Star Wars reasons.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think the game itself has some interesting mechanics at play, but truly, a lot of this game soars on the flavor of enjoying the setting that you're in and the characters they're in, so that you get to build a force that matters to you. I mean, I jumped into this knowing almost nothing about the mechanics because I'm just a colossal fan of the clones. It's one of my favorite things written into any IP that I could think of almost ever. Huge fan of the characters and what they portray there. So for me, it broke my habit of normally when I play war games, I kind of look at the group and go, hey, y'all pick your factions first, and then I'll just kind of go last and find something I like. This is one where I walked in and sat down at the clone table, and I'm not negotiating, I'm playing clones, and then bought and built and painted a clone army when there was no one to play the game with. And the flavor is what carried me through that, not the mechanics. It's just, that's the benefit of having an IP this strong, is that it really does bring the game to life in a way that it probably wouldn't be able to do if they had to write it all themselves.
Yeah, and like, the best way we can sort of get into the mechanics, because you hinted at it, is that like, this is, to start off, like the size, right? Like most games fall into like 40K style full army games with multiple vehicles, multiple squads of dudes, just a lot of model on the table. Somewhere between like 40 to 150 models on the table. That is not this, right? Like, but it's also not the other side of the coin, which the other side of the coin is skirmish games, where you have like individual models or small models, like scattered, like 10-ish, maybe 15-ish models, right? This is more than that, right? This is somewhere probably in between, a much more manageable amount of model, I would say. It feels a step above skirmish, a step below army game. You kind of have enough for around like 5-6 squads, maybe, of dudes max, plus like a vehicle.
And 2-ish heroes. Like,
For those of you who played old Warhammer, it feels a lot like 5th and 6th edition Warhammer, just had a lot less models. Feels like that.
Yeah, I've only written, about a dozen lists, but each one of them come in somewhere around 2 heroes, a couple foot troops, 1 vehicle, bam, you're off to the races. Which for me is pretty compelling. It's an interesting sweet spot, and it's a niche that I can't think of another war game that quite hits the same way. Which is really interesting.
Particularly in sci-fi. Particularly in sci-fi. Which is another boon here, right? There's not a lot of sci-fi games that can stand up to 40K. In brand recognition or even just like availability. Star Wars Legion is one of those things. Like, I have seen Star Wars Legion inside of like comic book stores, every game store I've been in. So I think I've seen it at Target before. Like, you can get Star Wars Legion basically anywhere you can get 40K. It's also super available on Amazon. It's super available on the internet, like all over the place. So just being like, in terms of availability, it's there. Like, it is very much just a game that you can just grab easily. Call out real quick in the middle of the episode about it. Every once in a while, you can find their starter sets on sale for like $40. Just wild.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. The IP has name recognition, and I think it gets it in front of a lot of eyes that otherwise it would be kind of sequestered to like a niche portion of the community.
It's true.
So when you play Star Wars, you get on the tabletop, you build your army, you put them down. You got roughly 2 heroes. Once you sit down at the table, you go to determine, first term initiative stuff, after you determine missions and so on and so forth, which we'll talk about later. And when you sit down, you go to do initiative, and in other games, you would do like a dice roll-off back and forth. Star Wars, though, what I think is interesting is that instead, they do initiative and orders based off a card system, where you have a handful of cards that you start the game with they call them like pips in the top left corner. Essentially how fast you are going to try to rush for first activation that turn. And the person with the lowest pips wins. You and your opponent both pick one of your cards out of your hand and put them face down secretly against one another, and you flip them. The person with the lowest pips gets first activation. And then also on those cards are a bunch of other effects, such as how many orders you can hand out, which we'll talk about. And secondarily, a lot of effects to sort of give buffs or debuffs to your own troops or enemy troops based off of your hero. And these are ripped right out of the movies. For example, if you play Obi-Wan, one of his cards is called Hello There, where he gets a huge jump ability for the turn and all sorts of bonuses for leaping into combat straight out of the scene from the movies. And when you play it, you know you're going to go in hard for that turn. As opposed to like Rex cards, which are much more long range, tactical, tricky sort of plays, which adds another layer of depth to the game. Once you get through your initiative, you have to start doing orders. So obviously, you just figured out who's going to go first. However, activation here isn't quite like 40k where you get to just outright pick your units. Instead, you are beholden to a random stack, except for orders. Like I said, when you pick one of them cool hero cards, they let you put orders on some units. You could take your little, they look like pogs. I don't know what they're actually called, but like tokens?
Like little circular tokens. Like they're little like cardboard tokens that come with everything that you get. They come in every like set of things or in the starter set. So if you buy models, it comes with the tokens you need for those models, which is very handy.
Every one of them
Very
represents a unit in your army, which is cool. And for every order that you give out, you can take one of those little tokens and put it face up behind your unit. That tells you that at any time when you could activate a unit, you could select that unit. No randomness involved. However, all of the stuff that doesn't have an order gets shuffled face down and goes into a stack. And when you go to activate, you either pick something with an order or you draw from the random stack. I've been told this is a lot like bolt action in a lot of ways. And that adds a fun level of randomness and strategy to the Force that I don't think I've seen in another game quite like it. Again, I haven't played bolt action, so this might be lost on me.
Yeah, I think it adds a lot of unpredictability because like a lot of games with their activation systems can sort of fall into a trap where like if you can just pick whatever you want, whenever you want, and alternating activations, you can like sort of like tailor your turn against your opponent. And if you're going with an entire army versus another entire army, you just really can go over the place and like sort of like tailor your shooting to be the perfect sort of firing range. Not here because it's randomized. You just can't pick it. It takes something that's already interesting, which is alternating activations, and makes it even more interesting because you can't necessarily rely on being able to activate a unit before your opponent does, unless you pay a cost to do so.
Yeah, I find there are a lot of moments where you draw something from the top of the deck and you go, it's not what I wanted. Okay, how do I make the best of this? And
yeah, how do I make this work?
like the puzzle inherent in that. It's a fun little flex on my strategy brain to see if I can't find a way through that. And as this goes along, as John said, you're doing alternating activations. I activate a unit. John activates a unit. I activate a unit. John activates a unit. And you do that all the way through the stack as you try to play the mission that you selected pre-game, trying to get objectives or rescue hostages, stuff like that. And as you do that, you shoot blasters, you slash with lightsabers, you use force abilities, everything out of the books, the games, the movies. And all of this results in, obviously, physical damage, where you're making armor saves and such to try to either duck for cover using a really nice terrain system, or to just tank it outright. And then secondarily, there's a minor leadership mechanic in there called suppression, where as you get shot at, even if you don't get damaged and it bounces off your armor, you start to get overwhelmed by the amount of shots being sent at you, and you want to put your head down. And that could lead to things like panicking. Which, again, a very nice system at the core of this game that I did not expect, and I haven't seen anything else quite like it before.
Yeah, it finds a way. It toes that line between morale that matters and it existing in the first place. I think, especially more recently, you've seen a lot of games just sort of kind of get rid of it or make it almost inconsequential. Here, it's tied directly into the mechanics of the game, but in not a weird, sort of frustrating way that's easy to forget. You were like engaging with it. And I think it also helps that a lot of especially like the Rebels faction, works with the tokens, like the suppression tokens, to different effects. It's not just like you can ignore this mechanic or you can have to deal with it. It is you use the mechanic in a different way, which is interesting.
Yeah, maybe your unit is better at getting rid of suppression tokens because you were just really good at popping your head up and getting back in the fight. Or maybe your unit actually gets a minor benefit for having a bunch of suppression tokens, which in and of themselves have a debuff. Stuff like that, which plays into the fantasy really well, actually, a lot like the movies. Also, it is a soft incentive to not dogpile one unit. Like in 40k, for example, if John has a big scary Angron model and his wingtip pokes out from behind a building, my whole army is going to shoot his Angron model until it dies. Everybody's going to pile onto it, because why wouldn't you? Here, suppression tokens, obviously, they could make you panic and have leadership problems, but they also give you cover benefits for that turn, allowing you to start auto-passing saves as you dive for cover, and you go prone, and your unit tries to react intelligently, making it so that the first group that shoots you gets regular shots. The second group that shoots you is going to have to deal with my light cover as I dive for any sort of prone cover. And then the one after that is going to have to deal with even heavier cover as you continue to try to rain shots and I scurry around. It's a very nice way to try to avoid just outright alphas. And I like it a lot. And honestly, I thought we would talk about more, but the game itself is pretty streamlined, and those are most of the core mechanics.
Yeah.
There are some other stuff around it, but that's most of the core game.
Yeah, there's some parts that are finicky. Like I will say, like the game needs some more passives, I think, when it comes to like cleaning up some of it to make it make a little bit more sense. But like the core of it's really simple. But you can kind of give it a pass for like one solid reason. All the rules are free. Like, all the stuff you need to play a unit you buy comes in the box, and the rules are just free. Like, they're free online.
You don't have to buy anything for books or codexes or anything like that, thankfully.
A slight negative is that there's no, like, official app, which is weird for a Star Wars game. Like, it's weird there's a Star Wars miniatures game that doesn't have an official app by the makers of the game. Like, there's fan-made ones, but like there isn't an official one, which is odd.
Yeah.
But that's it. The rules are free.
Yeah. Big benefit. And speaking of benefits, I mean, let's be honest. As I talked about in Rangers of Shadow Deep, no game is perfect, right? It just doesn't exist. If there was a perfect game, it would dominate the market, it would win. Impossible. Sure. Can't exist. In this game, while there are a lot of things I like about it, there are also some things that I find difficult to get my head around or just outright painful.
Yeah, like none of them kill the game outright, but there are things we would like to caution you about, just so that like you don't think that we're just like screaming it's all great. There's no negatives.
Yeah.
There's always some cons.
First and foremost, the thing that like John recently had his first game and it struck him the most is all of the everything you use requires proprietary gewgaws. You need their special dice. You need their special measuring sticks. You need their special movement sticks. You need the special cards. All of it. You have to have their stuff. You aren't going to just use tape measures and things like that. I think this was probably done to try to simplify a lot of the measuring and questions around other game systems that kind of pop up. But
yeah, like
that also has a drawback of you have to go buy these if you want to play.
Yeah, like a couple things here. Like I understand that this is probably because their demographic they're going after are like younger kids. Like they're not like the 40K demographic is going after like middle-aged men who have a lot of money. The demographic for this game is probably early teens, like maybe preteens.
Hmm.
I would have played absolute ton of this at 10 years old, so like
Hmm.
I get it. Uh, the other side to the proprietary thing that is, I think, makes it a little bit easier to swallow is unlike some of the other games that exist out there, theirs are really cheap. I think they sell an essentials pack, which comes with a set of the dice, a set of the like a bunch of the tokens, a set of like little nice stuff to have, and a set of the movement sticks and the measuring like range sticks, all of it for I think like $20.
Yeah.
Like it's all of it combined together. I think you might need a little bit more dice than they give you, and like all of that stuff comes in the starter sets, and there's two different ones that are fairly inexpensive. They're fairly cheap starter sets as well. So like it's not an extremely painful point, but if you were to like buy the starter set with your buddy, you can't just split the contents of the starter set with your buddy and you both have stuff to play the game.
One of you's going to have to...
Which is kind of a pain.
Yeah, one of you's going to have to buy the Essentials box.
Yeah. Which kind of sucks, but it is what it is.
Yeah. A con is still a con, even
is,
if they do have ways to mitigate it.
And it does feel a little odd here because the rest of the game, which is, fairly affordable, kind of makes you go, scratch your head and go, but why'd you do this? Like, why not just include this in more of your products? Speaking of models, though, like, some of the models are a little dated. Like, some of the models from their first run, like, particularly some of the older Rebels stuff, some of the older Empire stuff doesn't look super good. Some of their newer models look really good and much better, but some of their old models are definitely dated. And you kind of see why some of them are cheaper, I'll say.
Yeah, I get it. It was their first outing. They weren't using, like, hard pressure injected plastic or anything. They were using, I think, a PVC sort of type of plastic, and I don't think they're terrible by any means. I have certainly seen worse models in other games. However, compared to the time when they were released, they are behind the curve. And if you do go get a starter box for like Rebels versus Empire, you might notice that the minis might not be fully up to snuff for you. For me, even in my Clone Wars box, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, for example, he has his lightsaber, he's in his cool Sorasu pose, but I cannot get that lightsaber to stay straight for the life of me. Like, I've tried hot water and steam and the works, and whatever that lightsaber's made of, it just will not straighten out permanently. And I, from looking at my wife's minis, know that it's a similar problem in some of the other older kits.
But that might be changing in the future. There's one of the bigger rumors in the community is that they're going to be getting new starter sets with all new troops, which is highly welcomed. Because I think some positive news is that at Adepticon they said that they are going to be continuing to support this game for a while, up to doing big things in 2025. So that could be neat.
Yeah, I want it to be true.
Same.
Third, and this one is going to get a little game designy, so give me a moment. But a lot of this game, when I play it, right, when I went over the core mechanics, that's all there is. Because much of when this game was designed seemed to come at it with the goal of streamlining a lot of the pain and overwrought complexity of its competitors, right? If you're looking to onboard players that are less diehard, that aren't wargaming veterans, that are into the movies, they're into the shows, they're into the books, but they're maybe not wargamers yet, then it would be smart to tone down the difficulty a little bit to make it easier to jump on this train, get started, and make this maybe your first wargame. And in a lot of ways, I think that's incredibly smart. It's a great strategy, and I think they even hit it overwhelmingly so. Most of the time. But there is a section of this game that feels incredibly cumbersome and overwhelming, At least for me and the people I've talked to. And even more so, it feels almost antithetical to the design goal of what appears to have been the approach for the rest of the game system. And that's the upgrade cards. A lot of this game is you buy a unit, you get their card, you look at all their unit abilities, you're off to the races. Pretty straightforward. How many dudes you put in there, their keywords, all really straightforward. Your hero abilities, quite straightforward. And then they go, okay, you have to apply upgrades to your dudes, and even your base troops might need to have 4 upgrades per unit, maybe more. Your heroes might have even more. Each one of these are priced individually with individual keywords that stack together and synergize together. And you're going to have to do that army-wide, and it is integral to the game and you can't avoid it. Good luck. How many options do you have? Lord knows. I mean, it's dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens.
Yeah, and like they don't necessarily do a great job of explaining some of the intentions behind some of the upgrades, and like some of the upgrades, depending on who you're playing with, are just entirely useless. Like there's a lot of stuff based around like manipulating terrain use and especially terrain height. And if you're a person who doesn't have a bunch of terrain that you're playing with, like particularly that can go tall, there's just a bunch of stuff you're not going to use, and like a lot of these upgrades are just hard to even physically and practically use at a table, right? Because they come as these like small mini cards that goes next to your unit cards to kind of show what's on what. If you're not using like an app, because like there's no official app. And you're already on a table that is bigger than most kitchen tables in order to play this game. And so like where are you putting all those cards? Even if you only have like 8 units, that's 8 cards, and then there a multitude of upgrades, all attached to them that you need to keep track of on there, right?
I mean,
like
that's a lot.
It just seems like too much. Like it seems like more than is needed, and oftentimes it feels like it's just there to be a visual representation of something that could just be an option inside of an app, or like on a sheet.
Yeah, and I mean, this would be less cumbersome if it was like just on your elite units or like just on your heroes, where you're not going to have a lot of them.
Yeah.
But I'm going to read out the options for my Phase 1 clone troopers, my base troops. You can have a DC 15 Phase 1 trooper, a DP 23 Phase 1 clone trooper, Echo 5s, an RPS 6 Phase 1 trooper, a Z6 Phase 1 trooper, Boyle, Clone Commander, Clone Comms Technician, Clone Engineer, Clone Medic, Phase 1 Clone Captain, Phase 1 Clone Specialist, Phase 1 Clone Trooper, Waxer, Ascension Cables, Electro Binoculars, Emergency Stims, Environmental Gear, Grappling Hooks, Portable Scanner, Prepared Supplies, Recon Intel, Targeting Scopes, Concussion Grenades, EMP Droid Poppers, Fragmentation Grenades, Impact Grenades, Smoke Grenades, and Sonic Imploders. And that's my base troop. You have to go through and pick from those in 4 separate lists filled with all sorts of different keywords and abilities and interactions, and you're doing that on a per unit basis. It's just an overwhelming amount of stuff. Good God.
What you would expect from a crunchier game.
Yeah.
Like you would expect this from a game that is sort of on the tin, supposed to be more difficult. Like nobody complains about this sort of thing in like Infinity, for instance, because Infinity is a much more complicated game. Here, though, it is Star Wars. It is not high concept for the most part. It is blasters and Duel of the Fates. Like,
and again, if the rest of the game was more complicated, they were appealing to those people, sure, fine. I don't even think it would stick out to me, other than, wow, that's a lot of options. But we see what their goal is for everything else. It just feels weird.
And I also feel like the levers of complexity you're getting here is not worth the headache, right? Like, if these are effectively you're just spending points for upgrades, like in old 40K, right? You're buying troopers with special guns and like special upgrades to give you special things to signify certain things. There's a simpler way of doing this. There's a way they could make this easier and still have the same effect that they're wanting. Uh, and I'm hoping that this is one of the things that changes in the future, because it would just be much cleaner if they did it that way.
Yeah.
Because so much of this game they're doing right. This part is probably, even as a veteran wargamer, I was like, I have to play a couple games before I can even actually build a list that makes sense. Because like none of this, all of it's just like hieroglyphics essentially.
Mhm. Yeah, and all of them have individual points cost. So you're going to be tinkering with like very, very minute point differences in your unit loadouts to try to make all of this fit. It's
Yes.
and I can't imagine the amount of design hours they have to spend doing it. It's weird in this particular game. If you're into it, great. But I think it definitely stood out as weird for us. And it has the entire time I've been playing. And then fourth is, this one's a softer con, but again, just weird and rubs me the wrong way. And that's the board size and mission generation rules.
Yeah, I think the board size for me, I think, is the more egregious one of these two. And that is just because, like, I would get it if they were like, hey, we're going to play on a smaller board so they can fit on kitchen tables, right? If they were like, hey, what's the average size of a kitchen table? We're going to play on that. Cool.
No 6 foot by 4 foot, because we want to make it accessible for at-home hobbyists. All right.
But they made it 6 foot by 3 foot.
Yeah.
All you did was take a foot off the shorter edge. Like, at least take the foot off the longer edge. You know, the one that's harder to achieve.
Yeah.
Like, in most, like, home settings. Because, like, what you end up with is if you're not a person who's playing war games generally, and you try to play on a 6 by 3 table in someone's kitchen, you're not going to.
I don't know if I've seen a table that dimension in most kitchens.
Like, if you're a wargamer, you now don't have playmats that fit that, and also, like, what a weird, like, thing to have to measure out on your normal 6 by 4 table. Someone's just gonna have, each person gets 6 extra inches on their table edge for their cards, I guess. Is that what this is for? Like, it just, there's no reason for this, really. Like, even in, like, with their measurements, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So it's an odd choice. Well, again, one I kind of hope they change.
Yeah, John's guess was like, oh, it just makes it, they just did it to feel different. But like, I don't even think it feels all that different. It just feels kind of annoying. It doesn't differentiate it at all.
Yeah, like at no point was I like, wow, I'm really glad that we took a foot off of this table on the shorter end.
Big change. Yeah, it was just odd. So odd. And second is mission generation rules are clunky with some deployments that are difficult on this table, specifically on this table size. And again, they are very cumbersome for the game and their design. Well, as I anticipate them, their design ethos of being more approachable, being an intro game, a good on-ramp game. You have to set out randomized your deployments in like a row of 4 cards, and then below that a row of, I think it's 4, of cards that are like your mission rules, and then below that in a row of 4 cards that are like your mission twists, special rules, and then you go back and forth in an alternating way, electing to delete cards on the leftmost side of those 4 rows, and backy-forthy ways until after some number that I cannot remember of backy-forthies, the stuff on the farthest left side ends up being the mission generated for that game. And I would much rather have just randomly pulled from a deck to make our mission. In fact, if we play Legion of the Future, I might just house rule that that's how we're going to make missions happen. It's
I support
just that. Just have 3 decks, pull randomly, there you go.
Yeah, because like the sort of pick band phase of mission design,
not worth
for each mission before you play it feels like I haven't looked into tournaments for Star Wars Legion. I'm assuming they don't do this.
I'm assuming this is not part of how they play. This is like right out the core rulebook.
That would be weird.
I wouldn't want
as a TO, that's
but
weird.
I think they probably do.
And B, like I can only imagine the analysis paralysis that people have when trying to do this. Especially if you're like playing with a 12-year-old. Like if you're playing with like a 12-year-old boy and being like, "Hey man, pick the mission that you think best suits you." It's like a really easy way to like gotcha your opponent. And also like a really just weird thing to have to be making decisions again. And like an oddly crunchy mechanic in a game that is Star Wars. Just
Weird. Again, this one is softer for me because I can homebrew around it. Just, I'm going to take all three of these. They're all going to go in stacks. Pull one of each. That's your game. Okay? Like, that's your game. Go play. So it's not as bad, but it's just weird. Stands out weirdly. Maybe in a different game setting, it would have been cool. But with those cons out of the way, now we get to talk about the good stuff. Because I've been playing this game for a couple of years now. Obviously, I think the good outweighs the bad by a large margin. Why? And for me, first and foremost, it's game size in large part. I have played a lot of like 40k and AOS games with just an overwhelming sea of models on the board. Talking over 120, 140 models on one army. Across the table, over 200, because sometimes it's Horde Army versus Horde Army, like Skaven versus Goblins. It's just so many minis to move around the table, especially without movement trays. It is cumbersome. And then I also really enjoy skirmish games because you can get a little more in-depth with each of your minis, but you miss a bit of a flavor of like a full strike force in a skirmish that we're having with combined arms strategies happening. And I really, like, hats off to him. I have to applaud him. This size is almost dead on what I would imagine and want if you told me to, like, picture, not like a full war game, but like an actual fight from the Star Wars movies. You know, like, Rogue One, where they're having that, like, ambush in the street against the Empire. This is the size of that. You got a couple squads of like 4 guys, you got a vehicle in the mix, a couple of really cool heroes that are pushing and pulling and setting the scene. That's what I picture for Star Wars, and it just nails that. And I think that is incredibly valuable, especially if you are going to use this game to onboard newer players. It looks less overwhelming than looking at like a 40k table, for example.
Yeah, and I think that like the hobby debt is just smaller with less models, and like it's sort of there needs to be more games in this, like whatever we call this, right? Because we have names for skirmish games, we have names for army games, and like this is kind of an army game, but it's not quite that size. I want to know like what we should call this, like this little in between, and I really do wish there was more games like this, where there's just like less stuff on the table. But, like, to continue with pros, we have to probably talk about one of the biggest selling points, beyond it being, Star Wars. Like, and that is, these models are cheap. Like, cheap. Cheap. Like, if you want a war game, like a budget war game, where you don't have to 3D print anything, boom. Star Wars Legion. Like, for you. If you want to get into a war game with, like, maybe one of your kids, like, boom, here you go. Like, here is a game in which the models are not a ton of money. You can easily pick up, like, the whole range of models for a faction for a fraction of what you would spend in something like 40k or AOS. And you can get almost every faction in the game pretty easily.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll use, like, my own experience as an example. I bought the Essentials pack, which came with all the little widgets and stuff for about $20. And then I bought the Echo Defenders Rebels box for about $100, right? So that puts me at about $120. That gave me more than 800 points of Star Wars Legion, which 800 points in Star Wars Legion is effectively 2,000 points in other games, which means that I have a full army that is playable at events for $120. I might not be competitive, but it's a full army, right? With options to like tap in and out. And then if I want to expand that, I mean, characters are like $15, $20. Everybody likes the heroes from Star Wars. Boom, get them, right? vehicles being the most expensive pieces you can get, are like $60. That's cheaper than some base infantry for $40K. Like, this game is very cheap, and there is constantly sales online for these models. Constantly. There's probably going to be a ton, like May the 4th.
Yeah, keep an eye out.
Like, this actually might be dropping May 5th, actually. I don't think
Hey, good timing.
but yeah, like, truly, this is a cheap game. Go for it.
Yeah, it's cheap per box with like each unit of infantry being like $30. I was just looking up some prices. And then like most of the vehicles being like 60. I think the saber tank's like 80. It's more. Which again, you need less models overall and the individual boxes are cheaper. So it sort of stacks together to make an approachable game, not only like rules wise as we talked about earlier, but financially. Because I have done demo games of other things like AOS or 40K where someone had a really good time playing the game with me. I handed them a loaner army and they get done. And after we had a really fun time, they go, oh, so like, how much is it to play? Like, how much is it if I want to buy my army? And it is real rough to tell them the honest answer that depending on the army you're playing, it's $400, $500, $600 plus dollars. That's
Before books.
before books. That's a lot of cash.
Before paint.
That's a lot of money. Here, the answer could be less than $200, depending on what you're wanting to play. And
yeah,
that's total. That's with some options. Like John said, he got in cheaper. And that, if you're trying to use this to on-road people, is an incredible benefit. I cannot say enough how helpful that is for this game.
Yeah, I do think this game is sort of like my sci-fi pick of, is someone into sci-fi and wants to play war games? Show them this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, show them this game. It's like the easiest one to get someone into.
Yeah.
Even with the pain points, like, because like the pain points we're talking about here, right, are like, oh wow, like some of this is a little cumbersome. You know what else is cumbersome? $60 rulebook you have to have in order to play the game.
Yeah, at least here you could get around some of the pain points. For example, if you're going to play a new player and you know they're prone to analysis paralysis, just pre-build their list for them with their upgrades. So they don't have to look at the dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of cards and costs. Just build it for them to help them get in and have time. You know, if you think they're not going to have fun with the the mission picking mechanic, just pick the mission before the demo game for them. Just ignore it so they can focus on the core rules and have a good time. There are ways around that, and I think that's worth something. The cons that exist, but I don't think they're as weighted, at least not in my mind. Third for me, and what's kept me around for so long in part, is I love this initiative card mechanic. Like, the upgrade cards, I have qualms with. I wish it was implemented differently. But I think this initiative card mechanic slaps so much. Because you get to build a hand of, I think it's 7. And you have 4 base cards, spread, you know, a 1 pip, a 2 pip, a 3 pip, a 4 pip, and that's standard. But you also then get to, using your characters, build the rest of your hand. You choose how. You can mix and match if you have multiple characters. Which opens up a whole new lever of incentives and balance and power that you don't see on a tabletop. Now the question isn't just, oh man, how many dice of lightsaber does my dude have? You know, how many asses can they kick on the table by themselves in raw damage? Now, you might take someone who's not all that punchy purely because their cards are good. So that you have an advantage on the initiative and on the sort of board synergy standpoint, not just tabletop standpoint.
Yeah, and I think it helps sell some of these characters that are like strategists, and sort of like
strategists.
Yeah, there we go.
Strategists.
Yeah, strategists.
How many E's are in strategists?
It's a Kentucky education.
You went to school in Florida.
It's even worse. It sort of sells this concept that isn't just like, ah, what's my best gun shoot guy, or what's my toughest boy. It's also like who's strategically interesting,
Mm-hmm.
like and like who's the logistics master.
Yeah.
And they get these cool cards that sort of show that. It's very similar to like a Song of Ice and Fire, another game we have talked about before, with like a mechanic to sort of represent stuff that's going on outside the battle per se.
Yeah. Quick example, Obi-Wan's cool. We talked about him earlier. He gets a ton of dice. He has a great lightsaber attack. He's got some defensive buffs. He can guard for other units. He's great in the fist fight. And his cards are cool, but they make him better at fist fighting, largely. And that's great. But compare him to something like Rex, Captain Rex. John played against him. Rex's thing isn't necessarily that he shoots really hard. Rex's thing is that all of his tricks are around scout moves. That he gets to do scout moves pregame. That a lot of the units he wants to take get scout moves pregame. And that when he does scout moves, he can also give units within range that scout move as well. So you get to do a bunch of positional tricks to help you set up for a more proactive turn, to be in a better position before the game. And that's all outside of cards, which again lean into that idea and push the power in another direction with Rex rather than just being, a bajillion dice flooding the board. It's just cool. Big fan.
Yeah. Just and like the final point
that we tried so hard to think about differently, to refine it.
Yeah, but like there's no other way of putting it. Like the biggest pro here, it's Star Wars. Like playing Star Wars. If you like the movies, if you've gone through this entire like video, at the end of the day, it's a game where you get to play out the battles of Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
In our last episode, we talked about narrative games. This is a game that can absolutely be that. Like, do you want to play the Battle of Kashyyyk? Done. Do you want to do the Battle of Geonosia? Done.
You mean Geonosis?
Or Geonosis, yeah.
They're separate planets, John.
Yes. I know. It's late. I'm tired. If you name a battle in Star Wars, you can play it out here, and that's awesome. That's a whole lot of fun. That's a big thing you can do here, and I think that adds to the game in a real way, right? Where you can so directly watch a movie and then play it on the tabletop,
and it leaks through. I have taught this game to 5 or 6 people now, and I have yet to have a game, not one game, that at some point mid-game we didn't get into combat and devolve into as we start like shittily singing the songs from the movie or making blaster noises with our mouths terribly as we roll our dice pools. Because the movies are so good at injecting these sounds and this vibe and this theme into your brain. And it just all comes through here. And at least for me, it makes it a more fun experience than if this was a detached thing on its own. And it changes the vibe from the ground up. And if you're someone who wants to do along with the rest of us, then like, come on, let's do that. We can just do that. It's incredible. We're gonna skip that like Mishi building step because we can get around that and get straight to the pew pews. Straight to the pew pews.
Yes.
And truly, like, if that doesn't win you over to this game, or at least looking at it or trying it, then it might not be for you. And that's fine, because with an IP that's popular, as a pro, it does come with the inherent drawback that while the IP is very popular, it's very well known, not everybody necessarily likes it. And that's fine. That's totally fine. It's fair. It's all preference, down to the individual person. But it is one of the things that helps build this thing at its core for the people who it's for. And for us, by God, it works. God, it works. Especially now that they've finally given me my Republic Commandos that I've been waiting for forever. I was going to add another COD onto this list if they didn't give me Republic Commandos already, but they're on pre-order, so it's fine. I forgive them. I don't like I had to wait this long for the coolest unit in the entire Star Wars universe, but it's fine. I'm not salty. It's very cool. And I get Katarn pattern armor, which I love. But for y'all out there, if maybe you aren't totally sold that Legion, and specifically clones, are your only army for the rest of time, stay tuned. We are going to do more of these, talking about more games that we think need a little more spotlight, or at least to try to point you in the right direction if you're looking to broaden your hobby horizons a little bit.
And if you want us to talk more about Star Wars Legion, let us know in the comment section, right? I don't think Joe will mind.
I have no idea where you're drawing this insinuation.
But Star Wars isn't your thing. We'll be back next week with more stuff.
For now, it's been all of our opinions, bona fide, and Kentucky Fried. We'll see y'all in the next one.